without the other. And yet, what's happening now is there's a kind of rhetorical bludgeoning in which protesters who are saying, listen, let's take a second look. Yeah, we're all for social distancing, but there may be ways to open up the economy and still have social distancing. And those people are treated as if they are somehow reckless, as if they are not considering the possibility of death, as if they're trying to infect their friends. Nothing could be further from the truth. The legitimate debate is being demonized, and I think that's very unfortunate.
Laura, I want to get into the Chinese issue here because we now know that China obviously wasn't transparent, lied, didn't give the information they should have given, thought they could control this in Wuhan. It got out, it was a disaster. What about those in the
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay, we have audio, but why isn't my screen changing? Good afternoon, team, and thank you for joining me today. We will be starting the webinar in just a couple of minutes, just sorting out a few technical issues at this end. So, chat soon. Alright, they seem to be fixed. Okay, so welcome along. Thank you for joining me this Tuesday afternoon. As I sort of outlined in my invitation, this is really just an opportunity for you to ask some questions that you might have around the current property market. If you want to focus in on the stuff that I specialise in, which is the rooming houses, that'd be fantastic. And you may have also seen my videos I sent through over the last couple of weeks about fractionalised investing. I'll be pretty keen to talk about that as well, if you're interested in that. I wasn't going to do a presentation as such, but I felt just rambling for 2 hours or an hour, whatever we're going to be here for, might be pretty pointless. So I have thrown together a presentation, which we will run through, but it's, there's no agenda here. It is interactional as you want to make it, free flowing as we can have it. And if you want to ask me any questions, you should have a live chat panel on your screen that you can type your questions into. That's if you have a YouTube account. If you don't have a YouTube account, there's my mobile number behind me. So if you could shoot me through your questions on that mobile number, just text through to me, just with your name and the question, that would be great. And we'll just see how it plays out. So expecting about 50 online today. This is the first time I've used YouTube for any sort of streaming type application. So I don't even know where I can see how many people are on. I don't know. So, but if you're on, feel free to drop me a note in the panel there, or alternatively on my mobile. So what we want to cover today then is a little bit about who I am, how I got involved in this. We'll have a look at what's happening in the current market from a very high level, talk about the risk versus the opportunity. I want to touch on also the ongoing argument around shares versus property, maybe even what cash is looking like at the moment. What's happening in the news versus what's really happening, and then I'll run you through some of the stuff that I'm doing and the opportunities there, particularly around, as I said at the start, around the Class 1B or rooming houses space. So that's my passion, because that's where the money is, and you're not only providing affordable housing, but there are huge profits to be made in that space as well. Not cheap to get into, because the banks, whilst they are coming around and accepting them as viable investment options. It's not the old school slice and dice, slumlord millionaire, sort of slumdog millionaire type stuff. These are proper, built for purpose buildings, and everyone that sees them, there's losing mind at the quality and the returns that they provide. So that's that. So what we're going to do now is I'll flick onto my PowerPoint. So let's go back to the start. So that's me. FD Property Group, FD obviously for Frank Days. Specialised housing solutions. Specialised because I am focusing on that room in house space. We are merging into the NDIS space as well, although at the moment that's a little bit fraught with danger because I have heard some horror stories back from my property manager about people spending a lot of money getting these things built, and the government don't have the tenants there waiting for them to go. So I'm not across all the ins and outs of that just yet and how to best do it. So at the moment my focus is still on the rooming house stuff. A little bit about me. So been involved in property personally since 1990. That's when I bought my first property. It was purchased as a family home, and we brought it. There was an opportunity to do some renovations on that. From memory, we bought it for like 60,000 way back then, and this was in New Zealand. About 60,000, and did some renos and bits and pieces, and sold it for a few years later, about 145 from memory, 146. So that was my first dabble of property. Brought some land on the back of that, and had the idea that I was going to build my dream home, or our family home, up on the hill. Beautiful views over Christchurch. And at that point in time, I actually got involved in real estate from a professional aspect and began working for LJ Hooker. So did that for a couple of years. In the end, the market was really, back in those days, it was nothing for a property to sit on the market for a year. Vendors' expectations were over the top, and buyers just weren't there. So, it was a school of hard knocks, if you like, but it was really good because what it did teach me was really how to look after your buyer pool. Because whilst I moved to Queensland in 2002, what I noticed in that space was it was so easy to sell properties. No one really looked after their buyers. In fact, it was very much a case of, well, if you don't want to buy it, who cares? The next person walking through the door will. Whereas I'd come from that really tough environment, and I was looking after my clients on both sides of the equation, that is both the buyers and the sellers, to the best of my ability. So it put me in good stead for when things got tough, which did happen, obviously. We saw 2005, 2006 probably a bit of a softening in the market in Queensland. 2007, obviously, we had Kevin Rudd get in. We saw a drop in prices then, and I'll show you some graphs later about that. We also obviously then had the GFC. So through those tough times, it was very important that you knew how to manage both your vendors' expectations, but also your buyers, and look after both parties. All up, I've had 19 years, probably more than that now, of professional property industry experience, which covered off both residential, commercial to a small degree, and in recent years I've been highly focused on the investment space, which is house and land, the occasional apartment if it was a good one, some townhouses, and more recently the Class 1B rooming houses. And all of that experience has been derived across New Zealand, Queensland and Victoria. Now, I want to point out that no one's going to get this stuff 100% right all the time, and I'll include myself in that equation. and I'll highlight a couple of errors that I've made in the past. You know, we're not all gurus. We are just people who work day in and day out in this industry. But as I said, don't always get it right. So probably one of my biggest mistakes was back in 2006. We built our family home on the hills of the Gold Coast. So I got my house on the hill, and the intention was to build that and stay there for an extended period. Once we'd completed it, so we got most of it done relatively quickly, and then some of the landscaping took an extended time. But sort of by mid 2007, it was looking schmick, and I thought we could really make some good money on the back of what we've done here. And I suggested to the family that we sell, and I got the no. Not a no, never. It was more no. Instead of we put all this work in, and obviously we had a beautiful backyard, a lovely big pool, all the bits and pieces. Let's stay here for at least one summer to enjoy what we've created, and then early next year, mid next year, we'll sell. So I gave in there. My mistake. So what happened, as I said just before, in that year, Kevin 07, Kevin Rudd came in. There was a bit of a drop in confidence in the market, so we saw a softening in the market at that time, and that was followed quickly by the GFC. Now, the thing about the GFC here in Australia was it didn't really impact anyone to a great degree, apart from the fact that everyone's sentiment went through the floor. And unfortunately, investments, whether it be shares or property, are based on what's happening out there on a sentimental aspect. We all say it should be. We all know that it should be. It should be based on logic and numbers. But the reality is people just don't necessarily see it that way. And obviously, the property that I was hoping that we might get over 800 for soon became almost unsellable, simply based on the number of properties that came on the market at that point in time, and the sellers were drastically cutting their prices. And I'd have no idea why, because it wasn't required, but that's what they did. And so we held on to the property for another, I think, 2009, early 2010 we sold it. Probably in the end, based on the holding costs and everything else, it probably cost me maybe $50,000 to hold it that extra time, based on taking a slightly lower price for it and the holding costs. So none of us are perfect. So I don't know what you're seeing, because what I'm seeing on my screen doesn't look the same as I'm getting on my feed. So 1 minute. Okay, that's weird. I don't know what you're seeing. I'm hoping that you're seeing my PowerPoint presentation. And it should be on a page that says now today's market. So what are we experiencing at the moment? At the moment, obviously with the COVID, there's been a massive drop off in the market. Again, it's more about sentiment than anything else. However, obviously it is compounded by the fact that there are, in reality, people losing their jobs. Not like the GFC. I don't know what it was like in your neighbourhood, but where I was living, I didn't know anyone that was impacted greatly by the GFC. No one lost their jobs. Yes, they lost some money in the property values, but that was only if they sell. You only lose money if you sell, right? So right at the moment, there is a softening of the market. I've checked out the prices in some areas I'm interested in yesterday, and prices haven't really dropped yet. But then again, those properties haven't sold either. So I think in the next 2 to 3 months, we'll start seeing some downward movement in those prices. The fact that there's relatively low stock levels is probably supporting those prices to a large degree, but I think there will be some opportunities coming in the near future, because there's going to be some people that just need to sell. It's not if, when, or maybe. It is that they're going to need to sell. So those may be. Now, that sounds a little bit cutthroat, that we may be preying on, the downfall of others. But the reality is, if someone needs to sell for whatever reason, maybe they're moving, they've already purchased something else, they need to move for work, there may be deaths, there may be separations, whatever there is, some people need to sell, and if we can go in there and offer them market rate, whatever that market dictates, we're doing them a favour as much as we're doing ourselves. So you can't look at it as taking advantage of someone. If they need to sell and you're prepared to pay X and they're prepared to accept it, that's what we call free market. So willing buyer, willing seller. So what is the current opportunity? At the moment, interest rates are at historically low levels, and I looked this morning at what you can get for term rates. There's nothing on term rates above 2. A lot of it's under 1. We'll bring up I'll Google that a bit later on, and we'll have a look at that. But interest rates at historically low levels for lending as well, obviously. So you're getting in the 3s, and that spells opportunity, because if you buy the right property, you're always going to get more than that from a rental return, and certainly from capital growth long term. And we're not talking about buying something today and flipping it at the end of the year or even next year. We're talking about buying something and holding it long term. Population growth. So we will see a dampening on that in the short term, but medium to long term, Victoria is still going gangbusters. Sydney's still going gangbusters. We're not going to have any issues around that. Not only is the population growing from the external arrivees, people migrating to Australia, but obviously natural growth. We're living longer. A lot of the immigrants to Australia come from areas that have traditionally had large families as well. So, Peter Costello is saying have one for you, one for mum, and one for your country. Well, these guys are coming in from overseas, and they're having families of 5, 6, 7 children. So that was probably never factored in when they started, predicting future growth for population. Keep that in mind. Record spending from the government on infrastructure, on railways, on roads, and you'll probably see a lot more of that on the other side of this to try and create jobs. And given the money's still cheap, not just for us, but for the government, they should be tapping into that. Rising building costs. Now that's related to a couple of things. Demand on the suppliers is one. The builders I'm working with, I have clients who want to build 5, 10, 20 properties with us, and they expect that because they're going to do that, they're going to get a much cheaper price on the suppliers. But we negotiate the best prices from day one, and there's never any wiggle room there. In fact, because we start demanding so much supplies, the suppliers actually start looking at potentially putting the prices up as opposed to down. On the flip side of that is when things are going slow, and they're not at the moment because the government rightly determined that building was a essential service, and whilst it might not be essential in many people's minds, from a job perspective, they couldn't afford to shut that down and have all those people have to go into job seekers or job keepers. But when there is a downturn in building, the suppliers put the price up to maintain their margins. So it's no win situation there. The price is what the price is. The cost of doing business. We all know that there's a shortage of affordable housing, and I will talk a bit later about what we can do in the non-for-profit space, not just in the commercial world. And of course, with these properties, or the properties I deal with, always brand new, simply because it's much more tax effective and you have that depreciation. Now that's only for investment. If you're buying a property to live in, you buy what you want, whether it's old, new, doesn't matter. It's probably more about the area than anything else. So, is now a good time to invest? A few things to keep in mind here. History repeats. So, markets have cycles. Now, this particular cycle we're in, it wasn't predicted. Okay, so we just came out of a down cycle, which was expected. It was due. So, this current cycle has been forced by the coronavirus. Now, the upside of that is when we come out the other side, it should revert back to good times very, very quickly. So, back in 2017, probably about September, October 2017, I wrote some articles on LinkedIn basically saying expect the market to soften. We can expect a good opportunity for buyers over the next 18 to 24 months because prices will be depressed before then we see the market start heading back up. Almost to the day of 24 months is when the market turned around. So I don't have a crystal ball, but I do understand cycles. And I could see it. Most people in the industry could see it. The problem with most punters is they read what's in the paper. So people were still buying, at the top of the market into November, December, and by the time the numbers came out, for that quarter in February the next year, they saw that they'd potentially overpaid. So that depression in the market was fine. We expected it. It didn't fall off a cliff. We saw a softening of 7 to 10%, depending on where you were. And then, so as I said, October, I wrote that. October 2019, we saw the market turn again and we started heading back up. Now, it only took until February. So it was February we had surpassed the previous high. So that's how quickly it turned around. And then, obviously, what's happened now, who knows what's going to happen. As I said, there will be a softening. Having said that, with the low levels of stock and the difficulty of actually viewing that stock and buying it, may support the prices to a degree, but certainly on the other side of this, we'll see people come back in the market. I know some buyers who have had issues with their banks at the moment, so that's probably the main concern. But if you can buy now, you absolutely certainly should. So supply and demand, at the moment supply and demand is probably on evens. So the market's not really doing much. We may see the demand fall off in the near future, or the supply rise, which is probably the more likely of the two, and we'll see a softening in the market then. But it'll only be for a short period of time, so blink and you might miss it. And certainly if you are someone who reads the papers and you're expecting to predict the bottom of the market, you're going to miss out badly. Secure banking system. So one thing that came out of the Royal Commission was we really do have a good banking system right now. The opportunities that generated, yes, it made it harder to get money for some people, but then you can be confident knowing that if you've received that loan, you're good for it. The bank thinks you're good for it. You probably think you're good for it anyway, but the bank think you are good for it, and that's always a positive, obviously. I'm just going to have a look, see what my screen's showing me. Okay, well that seems to be right. There we go. So you may not have seen the last couple. So, sorry, I'm getting used to this YouTube setup. These are the last couple of screens that you may not have seen. So anyway, back to it. So the markets have cycles. We're in an unexpected cycle right now, but the upside of that is that we will see a pretty quick recovery on the other side of it. Secure banking system, talked about that. Government stimulus. So the government's done a lot in recent times to keep a focus on housing, and at the moment, jobs is part of that. They go hand in hand in a lot of aspects, but I want to talk a little bit more about affordable housing later on. But secondly, the fundamentals don't change. People still need to live somewhere. They want to live somewhere that's close to public transport. They want to live somewhere that's close to shopping. They want to live somewhere that's close to potentially medical centres. They want to live somewhere, if they have children, close to high schools, intermediate schools, primary schools. If they're a student, they want to live somewhere near the tertiary education facility they're attending. All of those sorts of things. So those fundamentals never change. Property versus shares. Now this is interesting. I just want to show you something. So this is a really great tool that shows you what's, because it's live. The biggest problem with property is the numbers are so old by the time we see them. They don't mean much. You're living in the past. But the thing with the share market is these are live. So I just wanted to show you this. This was, what have we got here? This was the GFC, October 07. Now, what we see here is, that's when Kevin Rudd got voted pretty much. The crash took us down to, there was a 50% crash. You lost half of all your money if you're invested in shares in this time. Okay? Obviously, we see some recovery across the years. There's always ups and downs. I actually remember 2012 as being a worse year, particularly in property, than 2007, 2008, 2009. But that's just my memory, thinking on the fly. But then we see trending up. By the time we got to here, which was January of this year, we had actually exceeded where we were pre-GFC. And then, of course, what's happened in the last few days or few weeks is another crash. And we've gone from, what have we got here? Let's call it 7,000 down to 5,200. So another massive drop, slowly recovering. This is the problem with shares is, you can lose 50% of your money literally overnight. We don't have that issue with property. So let me just bring this up. Desktop, no. PowerPoint. I just want to show you what the share bounce looks. The property bounce looks like. So if we come down here, I think I've got it down here somewhere. Oh, I thought I had it. Must be on the desktop somewhere. One moment. It's behind here somewhere. Here it is. So if we have a look at this, so as I said, during the GFC, which was about here, we saw the shares take a massive 50% plummet. Property softened. Now, I said earlier, no one's a guru, no one's all these experts. If you listen to someone like Stephen Keenan, I love bringing him in because he's a doctor of economics. He said in 2009, 2010, sell everything. Sell everything but the house you're going to live in because we're about to fall off the cliff. And he had all his property mostly in Sydney. That's where he's based. So if he sold everything about here, look how much money he's lost over the years. This number here from the year 2000 up to, what's that, 2017 that would have been. That is a 3.5 times increase. So clearly he's lost a lot of money. Here is last October, and we can see the market slowly coming back. And if we could have numbers that were as readily available as the share market, we'll see that number come up, and it would have gone above that peak there. And at the moment, it's probably back down to just around or just under that peak there. So we can see that property, yes, it'll take a breath. That's normal. This one here was a much larger breath, but it was due because we had had so much. You look from 2010, just a couple of minor blips, massive growth up to here. Now, a lot of spruikers out there will tell you that you can double the value of your property every 7 years. It's possible. It's unlikely. To be conservative, let's take the next step. A lot of people will tell you 10 years. But in my experience, you're looking at about 12 years. So if we look at here from 2000 to 2017, it hadn't from 2000 to 2010, it more than doubled. But then in that next 10-year space, it didn't double. Because if it had doubled from here, that would have to be up around 500. But overall, if we were to extend this out to 2024, I would say to you that it has doubled. Doubled to there, and then doubled again to there over the next, within 24 years. So don't believe anyone. What I'm getting at is don't believe anyone that tells you that the property prices double every 7 years. It's not the case. Okay, so back to the presentation. Okay, now so we've looked at property versus shares. I mean, I don't say don't have any shares. It's always good to have a diversified portfolio. But the reality is, property is far less susceptible to adjustments in the market like we've seen in 2007, 2008, and now. Media. So the biggest problem with most people is they read the papers, they watch the news to get their information, and they use that information and base their decisions on that information. The problem is it's normally wrong. It's written by someone who probably doesn't have a real understanding of investment products, probably doesn't have a real understanding of property, and probably doesn't even care, to be honest, because their job is not to necessarily provide the right information. Their job is to drive eyeballs to their medium, whether that's newspaper, online, or TV. And me, myself, I don't even rely too much on things like CoreLogic data. Not if I'm making an investment decision, if I buy something next week. I rely my buying instincts on talking to people on the front line, people in that market who are buying and selling. So the real estate agents, I'll talk to brokers. They can tell me what's happening right now in any given marketplace. So do yourself a favour. Look, I do read it and I do watch it simply because I need to know what bullshit they're telling us. Because when I sit down with a client and they bring up one of these stories, I need to be aware of what that story is, and so that I can go and well prepared to understand what might be coming. But the reality is, most of the time, it's wrong. They'll overtalk a good market, and they'll really doom and gloom a soft market. So it's real extremes for them. Hindsight is 2020. So did any of you purchase during the GFC, or did you think now's a bad time, it's too risky? I just showed you what Dr. Stephen King said, what he did with his property. I'm sure the people that brought his property are laughing all the way to the bank now. You know, I love Warren Buffett's, quote, "Be fearful when others aren't," and whatever. You know the one I'm talking about. What he's saying is, whatever the crowd's doing, you should be looking at doing the opposite, because that's where you're going to find the bargains. That's where you're going to make your money. And remember too that in property, you make most of your money when you buy the property. If you can get it at the right price, even if it's only 5% below what it is in 6 months' time, that's where you're going to make your money. And obviously holding it. You don't want to, flipping's not a good thing. No, not in my mind. Buy and hold. And then as long as you're using professionals to help you, so whether it's me or other professionals, certainly finance professionals, financial planners and the like, that's going to go a long way to help you mitigate any risks. So this is some stuff I had for a seminar I did a while back, but still relevant today. I guess what I'm saying is, you just don't know. So in 2003, we can see this yellow line here. That's what the AFR and ABS and Treasury predicted that the population growth was going to be like. In 2006, they reassessed that, and they said, no, it's probably going to be more like this. In 2008, they reassessed and go, oh shit, no, it's going to be like this. And as we can see here, this is their latest estimation, which was done in 2015. And then some other experts have come and gone and said, yeah, well, that's possible, but it's more likely going to be like this. And again, that's based on our open border policies, pretty much. We welcome in immigrants, but also remembering what I said about those immigrants that are coming into the country typically have much larger families than we are traditionally accustomed to. This just shows us where they expect Victoria to be by 2051, over 10 mil. I thought this was interesting. It just shows the way we're changing the way we live. So back in the day, in 91, 75% of all households were occupied by the one family unit. 2016, we're down to 69%. In 91, only 0.7% had multiple families. So that's probably, mum and dad and the kids and nan living with them, or granddad, or nan and granddad. Or maybe some cousins have moved in who have recently arrived. Now, again, probably due to the way our immigrants moving to the country are happy to live. I know a lot of my Indian clients have their parents living with them and vice versa. So we're seeing an increase in that number there of multiple families under the one roof. We can see the groups dropping off a bit. So this is, you call a group the way I grew up as a teenager, early 20s, where me and my mates all went out and lived together. That's slowly dwindling. What we're seeing is a big spike in people wanting to live alone. So it's gone up basically 20%. So from 20% to 24.4% in that period. That is the growing demographic. And the ironic part is, most builders and developers and investors, and I'm guilty. I've the last that house I talked to you about in Queensland, we built 4 bedrooms and a study, and there was only 3 of us living in it. And we sold it to someone who was just an elderly couple. They didn't have anyone apart from them in it. Developers and builders and investors are out there flat out building 3 and 4 and 5 bedroom homes, when the reality is the trend is towards more single occupation, lone people wanting places to live. And so there's a market that needs to be tapped into. That's where we come in with our Class 1B developments. Now, we've had a few more people join, so I'd just like to point out that if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the questionnaire box there, or even better, if you want to text me on 0412 969 366. That's 0412 969 366. Happy to answer any questions. So I talked about the space that I like to play in, which is the Class 1B developments, which is effectively the builder's terminology or the building code's terminology for a rooming house. Now, there's an opportunity under existing Victorian planning laws. So right now, we can go and build one of these anywhere we like in Victoria. We don't need to go to council. All we need is a building permit. We don't need to have a DA or anything like that. It's very straightforward. The difference between the house you live in, that will be considered a Class 1A. These are Class 1B, which means you can have 4 or more individual tenants under the one roof. There's some other stuff that you need to abide by. You can only have 9 lettable self-contained rooms, and all of ours. So a lot of the stuff that you'll see out there is what we call the slice and dice version. So someone's bought an old house and they've gone from a 4-bedroom house to convert it into 9, not 9, but maybe 6 different studios, and they rent each one of those out to different people, and they'll have a shared bathroom. They might have an extra 1 or 2 bathrooms and 1 lounge room and 1 kitchen. The way we do ours is, because we build from the ground up, we have 9 self-contained studios. So these come each with their own ensuite, each with their own heating cooling system, so split cycle air conditioning. They have their own kitchenette, and we recommend that you provide them furnished. They're about 23, 24 square metres. So when a lot of people look at them and they go, well, that's tiny. The reality is people are happy to live in these. And this is, I've travelled extensively through Europe. That size is pretty much bang on average, particularly for single people. There's one guy I follow living in Paris. His room is 13 square metres, and he's got a washing machine and he's got all sorts in there. These, and people that I've taken through completed projects, are astounded at the quality that we're providing for these tenants. So each site also includes a common kitchen with more substantial cooking facilities. We'll have commercial laundry facilities, so coin operated or pay wave machine for your tenants to use. Some of the builds we're doing recently, we've put in 2 washing machines just to make sure that there's no issues there. From site selection to completion, 9 months. So if you buy the property today, you go on conditional today, we can start doing our survey stuff, we can do our plans, we can apply for the building permit, we can apply to have the services disconnected, and then once the property settles, we go in there, we knock it over, disconnect the services, knock the property over, and that gives us about 3-month lead time. Then we can start building, and it takes 6 months to get it built. These have a massive demand from tenants due to the affordability, and typically you're going to see a net yield of around 8 to 9%, plus capital growth. So, good money. Here's some examples of stuff we've done in the past. This is a single level one in Frankston. If you've got a site long enough, it's good to have a single level. It doesn't cost you any less, really. What you save on going up, you spend on concrete and roofing. And one of my builders actually hates doing single level ones because they're much harder to build. excuse me, purely because of the plumbing and the electrics. Here's an example of a 2-story one that we've did in Clayton. Now this particular owner built 3 in the same street, and they are 100% let to overseas students. Obviously this year they won't be, so I'm not quite sure what he's doing with them. He's probably just gone with local students, but he does have a contact internationally who provides them all the students. They may have actually got in before the borders closed anyway, so I'm not sure. Here's an example of what they look like inside. So ground floor one, this one, we've got an outdoor, and this is an artist's impression, but this is pretty much what they look like. Outdoor area here, kitchen. This one has a dishwasher. We don't put dishwasher. I actually know it's probably a bar fridge they put there. Convection oven here. Ensuite here, and then you'd have your bed here, and the front door over here, and a wardrobe as well. So kitchenette, bathroom and ensuite, living area. We recommend you include the cost of all utilities and Wi-Fi as well. Here's an example of a floor plan for a 2-story. I show you this one because we no longer use it. I've got a much better design now, but it gives you an idea of how that works. So previously we used to have all the rooms running off an external walkway. That was deemed illegal by VCAT back in 2018. So now we have to have internal hallways for everything. But you can see all the plumbing's close to each other, make it easy there. This is the disabled room, so each build has to have a disabled facilities on one of the rooms downstairs. There's the kitchenette, and there's more of a kitchenette. So that's more of a lounge area, and that's a kitchenette over here. Upstairs, you come up the stairs, and then we've got 5 rooms upstairs. Here's an example of a single story build. Front door up the middle. We like to put little courtyards off each one where possible. I've actually redesigned the single story stuff as well now, so this is an old design, but you know, the only reason I've redesigned them is because these being quite squarish can be difficult laying out your furniture. I've created a design where they're much more rectangular in shape, but yeah. And we don't want to see that. So here's some case studies, and this shows us. So this particular property was purchased for $670,000 in Frankston. This is what we built. It's now returning $147,000 a year. All up, capital expenditure was 1.4 mil, so it's returning 11% gross. Here's one we did in Noble Park. $540 to buy the property. It was returning 3.5%, which is pretty good actually for a residential property. It is now returning $140,000, 11%, and the capital investment on that was 1.23. And this one in Clayton again. Clayton, obviously the land can be a bit more expensive to get started, but $950,000 we paid for it. Gross yield on that one back then was 2.5%. It's cost us 1.65, but it is returning $164,000 a year, which is a 10% gross yield, and that gives you some shots of the internals. Now, one of the concerns always is what's the exit strategy on these. So you would sell them what the value is called best use, or under a commercial cap rate. So best use means if the zoning on that land had changed since you purchased it, and now you can put an 18-story high-rise on it, the price of that land has gone through the roof, and you're probably going to sell it as a site. Alternatively, you would sell it as a commercial type situation where you can demand a cap rate between 6.5% and 7.5%. So to give you an idea, this one here, so at 1.4 million to build, it's return, let's call it 150, at a 7% cap rate, that makes this property worth about 2.1 million. So once that's been occupied for a year, we would then get it revalued by a commercial valuer, and that number would come in about 2.1. So there's been an uplift of 800,000 in year one. Okay, so that's the upside on these. We currently have a fund manager who will buy these from us, as long as they have a minimum of 6 month returns, and they'll pay a 6.5% cap rate, which is awesome. But that is net, which means that's all expenses, including any interest payments they have to make, whereas these numbers here, we wouldn't be worrying about the interest requirements. Now, if we had a situation where the market had really fallen to pieces and we couldn't find a buyer for it, we couldn't find someone who wanted to make 7% on their money, given that the banks are only offering under 1 at the moment, we could then approach non-for-profit organisations. So one of the things I'm doing at the moment is I'm going to introduce some fundraising, and we're going to try and put some of these through for non-for-profit Salvation Armies, Launch, St. Vincent's, etc., to provide some housing for the at-risk or the homeless. But these guys would potentially look at buying a completed one based more on a 4% cap rate or 3% cap rate, which is basically, if you were to build one of these and give it to them, their tenants would receive enough money to provide you a 3% return. So it's basically a government guaranteed rate, because that money comes directly from Centrelink into your bank account. So that's worst case scenario. So no one sent me any questions yet. That's all I've got to do on my presentation side of things. I'll show you this. So this is a feasibility. And wait for that to come up. So on this, this is one I've done that we want to use for non-for-profit examples. So you can see here that even at $180 per room, the returns are, after all expenses, $9,000 a year. That number, I'll just try and find another one for us. So here we have one. This is for one we're looking at doing in Heidelberg Heights. Maximum price we're going to pay for the land is $800. The build's going to be about $640, plus all these other ex-contract costs, and we'll get minimum of $340 per room for these ones. I've factored in 6% interest rate because this is going to be used for fractional investing, and that's the price we pay for interest under that model. You could probably do this on your own and get sort of 4.5% at the moment. But even at 6% and minimal, you probably get more like $360 per room, but I put in $340. You're going to still see returns on your investment of 8% based on a 50% investment equity. So as we can see here, the rent on this will be $151, 47,000 going out in interest, 29,000 for outgoings. That's because we have to pay a management fee to Domicom, which is going to be about 15,000 on this particular property per annum. But if we were to take that out, that number goes down to 14, and that covers all your utilities, your rates, your insurances, your license, everything you need to do. And then we've got our letting fee here as well. So after all of those expenses, you're still walking away with 63 grand a year. Now, obviously, if you could get a better interest rate, you're going to make a lot more. If you could get, if you're not doing it through Domicom, you're doing it yourself, you're going to knock that down. That number then becomes closer to 90,000 if you do it on your own. All right? So that would replace someone's income quite nicely. All right, so we've been going for about an hour. That's all I really wanted to show you. Look, I think depending on where you are right now, I'm sorry, yeah, the last thing I will show you is, because we've only got a few left, I'm happy to share this with you now. This should be, no, I'm probably not going to be able to. Yep, that should come up. So I've talked about fractionalized investing. Fractionalized investing is effectively where we take a property, or in this case, a strategy, because we haven't brought any property just yet. We put it to market, and I'll be doing this to my database. I was hoping to have this signed off yesterday. It hasn't come back yet. But basically what happens is we offer up one of our properties, or the opportunity to become involved in one of our properties at a fraction of the cost. So basically it's syndicating this build. And now this is my new design. The difference between this and that other two-story one is the hallway runs down the south side of the building. These rooms then have a front door here, and they run from the corridor right through to the side. That's where the balcony is. If it's downstairs, you've got the nice gardens all down that side, so the corridor on this building is all down that side as well. So you could be a part of this for as little as $25,000. It is all ticked off by ASIC, it's all ticked off by ATO. We have to be very thorough on these. We have to present a case that shows that we're not going to lose the client's money, because these are also available to invest in with your self-managed super fund. So I'll be sending this out to you shortly. Given where we're at the moment, we're going to run this for longer than we would. We want to have all the funds raised well before August, obviously, but we're going to give ourselves to August. That particular build, we're going to focus on Heidelberg Heights. We expect to get $3,060 a week minimum, potentially another $20 to $30 per room, so that would be what, say $20. That may go up to sort of $3,250, $3,300 per week. Our yield, rental yield is 8 to 9%. Estimated capital growth 5 to 6%. That number is based on what Heidelberg Heights is doing right now. As I mentioned earlier, because we would have these valuated based on a commercial rate, the first year you should see sort of anywhere between 25 and 30% growth. This particular document says 20,000. I think we're going to do 25. And general advice, So who should invest? these are suitable for anyone, retail investors. So I do have retail funds invested in these. I have fund managers. We have this particular model is going to allow for self-managed super funds. As you're probably aware, self-managed super funds aren't allowed to build properties. But under this model, because you're buying into a trust, you're not building anything, if that makes sense. So you can actually invest in this with your self-managed super fund. This is for people looking for exposure to high-yielding residential properties, which also fits into the affordable housing model in suitable locations. The upside of providing affordable housing is many. Not only is it philanthropic, but from a financial perspective, if you do it right, you can potentially avoid paying land tax. Investors looking for specific asset allocation. Oh, now here's some numbers on one we did for Bundoora. So they've got the land for $650, the stamp duty, the bill price, that's turnkey, solicitors fees, miscellaneous, which, by the way, we never went near 100,000 in miscellaneous. I don't think we tapped into that at all. Interest rate at 6%, occupancy 95%, LVR at 70%. Total cost to build this 1.5. And what I did here was I've compared leaving the property as a 3-bedroom house versus turning it into one of ours. So per week 410 versus 3,060. So at a 95% occupancy rate, that's 20 grand a year versus 153. The interest on your resi house was 31. This was a while back. 31,500. Obviously, that's probably going to be closer to 3 now. And I did these ones at 6%, which you can get much cheaper than that now. 63,000. Property manager. Obviously, there's a big difference in costs there. Our rates are the same. Utilities, 4.5 grand. None for this. Insurances, almost double in most instances. And maintenance, because this was a really old house, we allowed 5 grand. This is brand new. We allowed 2,100. Sorry. That will never get used in the first year or two, maybe even 3 or 4. But if we budget for it over the course of 10 years, it probably works out pretty right. So total expenses 40. Let's call it 4,500 versus 84. Income on the 3-bedroom house, you're losing 20 grand. On this, you're making 69. So net yield investment 1.5%. That's after all your bits and pieces versus 8.79. Cash on cash return. What that means is if I only invested 30%, how much do I get back on my money? On this, you got nothing. You lost money. That's pre-tax, of course. You're going to be able to do some stuff around depreciation and losses, etc. And this one was at 18.5%, but also pre-tax. So, huge difference. And here's those case studies we talked about earlier. A little bit about me. Focusing on specialised housing property developments like this, branching into potentially the NDIS soon. I know builders are very keen to get involved in it, but until I can be sure that the government's going to pay my clients money for them, not much point in getting into it. So that's pretty much it. This is what we plan to build in Heidelberg Heights. So this would be the facade out the front. We provide security camera system, high quality finishes. That includes things like stone bench tops, air conditioning throughout, engineered timber boards, wet tiled wet areas. Sorry. Each studio has a built-in robe. Downlights throughout, reverse cycle air conditioning throughout. And here's the floor plans. So as I said, what I wanted us to build was something that was able to make these rooms a little bit more user-friendly. So instead of having the passageway go up the middle of the house, we've got it running down the south side of the building. You come in the front door, there's a little kitchen area, lounge area here, leading out to an outdoor space here, potentially a barbecue if you want to put that in there. Into the disabled room, obviously their rooms are a lot larger than the others from an ensuite perspective. Each one has its own wardrobe, its own kitchenette. And as we come down, so in this is a standard room. You'd come in, there's your ensuite, there's your bedroom area. Now we've put the wardrobes at a 90-degree angle out from the wall to create some separation between the bed and the living area. Okay, so then down this side is all your plumbing stuff. You'd have your little setup here for your table and chairs, sliding door to an outdoor area. You'd have a clothesline, bits and pieces. And then this builder's actually put all the clotheslines out the back. I'd actually have individual ones at each room. You go upstairs, and then again, same setup for the rooms, but they just come out to a balcony instead. So you can see there the wardrobe, wall-mounted TV. We'll be doing that for you. Little lounge, little coffee table there probably. Desk setup, kitchen, and ensuite. So why Heidelberg Heights? Why are we focusing on there? So nearby we've got La Trobe University, we've got RMIT, we've got Melbourne Polytechnic, there's train stations everywhere, there's Northland Shopping Centre, there's Austin Hospital, Warringah Hospital. You can read it for yourself. There's so much going on in that space. And in Heidelberg, there's not one of these in place. So there's a real gap in the market in this area. There's nothing listed in Heidelberg. Suburb profile, so vacancy rates of 2.3. That's remembering these are for standard properties. Ours will be less than that. I mean, we say 95% occupancy. We're being generous. We're being conservative, I should say. Rental yield in the area is 3.2. As I showed you before, ours will be over 8. So we saw in the last 5 years price growth of 41% in units. So in 10 years, so as I said earlier, people tell you prices double in 7 years. Well, we've been through a very good patch. Well, relative to history. 5 years we've only seen 41%. So if you had 10 years, it's 82%. That's why I say 12 years to double your price. And the house prices were even lower than that. Population for this particular area, 6,000 people. That's from the census. And then we've got some information here about Domacom and how that works. So that's the opportunity coming. As I said, I've got on here 20,000. I'm waiting to hear back whether we're going for 20,000 or 25,000 as a minimum investment. Obviously, at 25,000 we need less investors, although 20,000 is also a nice round number for people. So that's it. I haven't had any questions come through, so I'm not quite sure if you have any for me or not. Let me just jump over to my YouTube. No questions there. So unless you do have any questions, I'm pretty much done. I hope that's been of some value to you. As I said, in this market, you need to look at risk versus opportunity. If you are in a position to do something, you should be doing it. Money's cheap. The cash is doing nothing sitting in your bank account. Even on a term deposit, sort of 1% if you're lucky. Sorry, 2% if you're very lucky. There will be a softening in the market over the next couple of months, but not dramatic. The sooner everyone starts getting back to work, the better, obviously, for everyone. We've talked about shares versus property. You know, property, you're never going to lose 50% of the value of your house overnight. Shares is very, very easy to do. The other thing too is, which I didn't mention at the time, is if you've got 20 grand to spend, or 40 or 100, if you're going to buy shares, how much can you buy? You can buy 20 grand worth of shares. When you're buying property, even under the fractional investment scheme, you can leverage that 20,000. You can leverage that 100,000. So with our fractional investment, you can double your money effectively. So when you invest 20 grand, you're actually buying a unit that's worth 40. That unit, in a year's time, well, actually, let's call it 18 months' time, once we get the property revalued, because obviously you put the money in now, and until we get enough funds to start the project, it just sits there. Domicom pay you an interest rate. It's not much, but it's probably as much as you're going to get in the bank. Once we accumulate enough money, we then put together the actual project. So the one I've just shown you is what we could do, what I want to do today. If it takes us 3 months to raise the funds, things might have changed by then, and we might have to focus on a different area. But the numbers will still be the same. Once we get to that point, though, we will then parcel up the actual project, the site, the build, the actual numbers, present it to you. You say yes or no. Everyone says yes, we don't do it. You say no, we give you your money back. No dramas, and away we go. When you're buying shares, you don't have that opportunity. You buy shares, you buy $20,000 worth of shares, you receive 20 grand worth of shares. Property, you leverage it. You know, at worst case scenario, which is under fractional, you're going to get something that's worth twice as much as you invested. If you buy a residential property, you're going to invest 100,000. You can buy something worth 500,000. Okay. Now, I just wanted to compare Class 1B versus standard residential housing. So until December last year, I was mixing it up with a little bit of this stuff and a little bit of house and land as well, because that's what most of my clients were after. You know, it just makes sense to them. You don't have to explain it to them. That's what everyone else is doing, so that's what they should do. So if you were to have a portfolio of 3 different properties of house and land, and let's call it 500,000, 500,000, 500,000. You know, if I sell you something out in Melton, that's what it's going to be. 500,000 will get you a good bit of dirt. It's going to give you a really good house, 4-bedroom house. And when you rent it out, you're going to probably get somewhere between $360 and $380 a week. Let's call it 400. So if you've invested 1.5 mil, not all your money, but you and the bank, you've invested 1.5 mil. You've got 3 lots of insurance. You've got 3 lots of rates. You've got to deal with, potentially different council areas. You've got 3 different kitchens to maintain. And I'm talking about the full ovens and waste disposals and all of that. And you're bringing in $1,200 a week. If you invest 1.5 mil in one of my rooming houses, you'll be making about $3 grand a week. Plus, let's put it in Werribee, you'll be making $2,800 a week. 1 set of rates, 1 lot of insurance. Yes, it'll be it's probably going to be close to double what it's standard residential price, but you're still saving there. The numbers just work better. You've got 9 streams of income, so you're protecting yourself. If you lost 3 tenants out of one of these, you would still be living comfortably off the income you're generating from one of these. If you lost 3 of your tenants from 3 different rental properties, you're dead in the water. So that's risk versus opportunity. Well, that's all I've got, guys. If you're not going to pop any questions through, I'm going to wind it up for today. Thanks for stopping by. We had, I think at the peak, we had about 25 people. So not quite as many as I'd hoped for, but that's okay. We've all got busy lives. Now, I will be sending out, as soon as that fractional investing stuff gets signed off, and it could be well this afternoon, it might have even come in while I've been on this, I'll be sending out to all of my database, so you will receive that. I'm hoping to sell this first project out to my database because I want you to benefit from this immediately. I think the next project we do, we're probably going to be able to go to a wider market, but I think by the time we get to doing that, that cost of the land's going to be going up again because it will be the other side of this COVID. The market would have settled down again and headed back up. I'd love to have you guys involved in it. I do have a waiting list in place already of my family and friends who want to get involved in it. I'm going to get involved in it, so I'm happy to put my money into it. That's how confident I am about this particular project. So if that's all we have today, I'll call it quits. Thanks for stopping in, and we will see you soon.